Coopville, and I'm a sophomore.
Hi, I'm Amanda from Coopville, and I am a junior.
Hi, I'm Erica from Coopville, and I'm a freshman.
Hi, I'm Violet from Coopville, and I'm also a freshman.
My name is Max, and I go to the Davidson Academy in Northern Nevada in Reno.
Hi, I'm also Erica, and I'm a senior at Davidson.
Hi, I'm Derek. I'm a senior at Davidson.
All right, thank you. Now we will begin the match. Teams, from this point on, there are no substitutions, consulting with anyone other than your teammates, or reviewing outside materials. Coaches and spectators, please remember that communicating with either team, either verbally or via chat, is impermissible. Please keep your microphones muted throughout the competition so that the students can concentrate. I'll now flip a coin to determine the presenting order. Davidson 2, someone from your team, please choose heads or tails.
We would like tails, please.
All right. Okay, so it is heads. Coopville, would you all like to choose if you'd like to be the presenting team first or the commenting team first?
I think we'll be commenting team first. Thank you.
Okay, so at Davidson 2, you will present first and are known as Team A. Judges, please note that on your score sheet that Davidson 2 is Team A and Coopville is Team B. So now we are ready to begin. The case number is case 5, what's in a name? And the question is the following. What considerations should guide institutions' decisions about whether to rename buildings? And it should shortly be available in the chat box for your reference. There it is. So Team A, you now have up to 3 minutes to confer before beginning your presentation. Both teams may take notes and communicate in their breakout rooms while conferring. Producer, you may open the breakout rooms now.
All right, all is off to the races. This somehow feels even more like rushed, like a marathon online as it does in person. Like I've just not, I was not prepared for this.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Yeah, it's a haul. Next time, so yeah, the next time we do one virtually, there will be like an hour between each match.
Nap hour.
Nap hour. That sounds good. If for no other reason than because I want to nap. Yeah. It's like it's probably not for the kids. I'm sure like most of the kids are probably fine. It's for us. It's for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm drinking coffee at 4 p.m., which it's not going to be good.
That's not going to play out well.
That'll be great. That'll be great for the next hour or two. But after that, you're gonna regret. Like it's just gonna be like, yep, you're gonna never sleep again. It's fine.
I don't know how much time we have left, but it's so nice to see you again, Simone.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you too, Kayla. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, yeah. I'm a philosophy major now, so and that was heavily influenced by your legal philosophy class. So
awesome. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, studying for the LSAT, so.
Oh, really? Okay, that's exciting as well. When are you taking it?
In January, so nice. January 15th, so soon.
Yeah.
Very soon.
So the plan is take it, then maybe take it again in the summer if you have to, and then apply to schools in the fall, or applying this year?
I think I'm going to try to apply this year. I'm just trying to see what happens.
Badass. Yeah. I love it.
We'll see. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's really cool. Do you have like an idea of where you want to go, or?
I have like regions in mind, but it really just depends on my score on the LSAT. I'm going to let that inform kind of what my options are.
That's wise. Yeah. I'm so excited for you. That's really awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, the students are lucky to have you.
No, they're like, I mean, so I've got a college team that's competing right now as well, and it's it's not going well. So I'm really glad the high school teams are doing so well. Yeah, they hit Stanford the first round, and I think that just like destroyed their confidence. But yeah, because they're like, I mean, I think they had like kind of substantively they had a better case. But
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so Team A now has 5 minutes to make its presentation. Any member of the team may speak one at a time. Team A, I will give you reminders in the chat when there are 3 minutes and 1 minute remaining.
May I start? Or may our team start? Okay, I'm starting. All right. So first of all, I'd like to just thank the judge, the judges, producer, and moderator for giving your time to us today. And also I'd like to congratulate the other team on making it to the semifinals. So with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement over the summer, many different names have been removed from places, and we've had a lot of discourse on whether names should generally be removed. So the factors that our team is overall going to present are history, public opinion, and the contributions the person has made. So we should consider the history because we do need to learn from our history. However, we do need to remember that on the face of a building is not the only place where history can take place. There are alternatives such as museums or even within the building just to explain the history of the building. Additionally, public opinion does play a role. We would like to stress the safety and comfort of students. If someone who has previously been racist or done just terrible things to a specific group of people, that group has a right to feel safe in an academic institution. And if a name is going to threaten that safety, then it should be removed. And additionally, the contributions of the figure in general should be weighed, like whether the contributions are wholly positive to the world or wholly negative. And I believe Max has some more specific examples on those fronts.
Yes, thank you so much, Erica. So I just want to add on to one of the last things she said about considering a person's life more holistically rather than just why we want to take their name off of a building or why society wants to take their name off of a building. So an example of this, I think, is a recent controversy at Princeton about Woodrow Wilson, who wasn't a Confederate, but I think it's a similar story. So Woodrow Wilson is notable for being both the president of the US during World War I and also the president of Princeton University. But also he was notable because The Birth of a Nation was one of his favorite films. And essentially this film is one of the most racist of all time. It depicts African Americans raping and murdering white innocent women. And it's all based on pure stereotype and not grounded in any fact. It was meant to stir up race hatred. And it was one of his favorite films. So that is a significant mark against Woodrow Wilson being a racist. But then on the other hand, he also did significant things to benefit the human race. For example, he helped found the League of Nations, which essentially morphed into the United Nations after World War II. And the United Nations is a great organization. For example, the United Nations Food Program recently won the Nobel Peace Prize. So it's like undeniable that the United Nations has had a positive role in human rights overall, and that can be traced back to Woodrow Wilson founding the League of Nations, the parent organization. So I think in this case, we should consider Woodrow Wilson in a more holistic sense. So I think there's a little bit more ambiguity to this question, rather than just Woodrow Wilson's name should be taken off of the building because he liked The Birth of a Nation. And I want to pass it over to Derek, because I think that he has some interesting things to add.
Yes, thank you, Max. I want to go to the other side of the spectrum. So what happens when someone who wasn't necessarily evil per se, but didn't really have a great impact on history, as great as Woodrow Wilson's? And to this, I'd like to turn to Hannah Arendt's The Banality of Evil, in which he discusses a few Nazis who were not evil in themselves. They were deemed normal by any people who would meet them in person, but committed many atrocities across the war because, of course, they were ordered to. There is definitely we have to definitely consider when looking at someone's intentions, their evilness or goodness, if whether their circumstances had something to do with it. Same thing with the Confederates. A lot of people were just born on the Confederate side, but they carried out their duties to their supposed nation because they simply were just part of the Confederate nation. The problem with this, of course, is that they represent an idea. People who are like this, they supported something that we condemn as evil. For example, the Nazis or the Confederacy. Because of this idea, we do have to consider more into account exactly what historical record they have. Whereas Woodrow Wilson, who harbored racist beliefs, he played a really formative role in developing the United Nations. Ultimately, people who were not just, who are evil on the other side, but ultimately helped perpetrate some evil acts, we have to consider more what they perpetrated rather than them in themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Team A. Judges, please mark your scores for Team A's presentation. Team B, you now have 3 minutes to confer. Both teams may take notes and communicate in their breakout rooms while conferring. Producer, you may open the breakout rooms now.
I should say, if I haven't already, Kayla, thank you for being here on a weekend after the semester has ended and all day, which is like 3 like spectacular accolades. We very much appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, no worry, no problem. This is a lot of fun. Yeah, I've enjoyed working with my team throughout the semester and like hearing like these rounds take place. They're really cool.
Good.
So thank you for having me.
It's a pity you couldn't actually watch them. Like,
yeah, I know I tried to listen as much as I could, but
it's unfortunate but fair. That like I suspect there would not be a fairness issue, but I also don't want to put anyone in a position to ask that question.
Oh yeah, that's totally understandable.
It just occurred to me, I can make you a co-host and you can actually see the timer. Do you have a timer in the corner now?
Would it, like the top corner?
Yeah.
No, I don't see it. I don't see one.
I guess I would have to make you the actual host. And
Oh, okay.
I don't want to push that off on you.
No worries.
We got about 45 seconds back.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's what Michael did. He just like told me about how many seconds we had left. So perfect.
You've got me wanting coffee at 4 p.m.
I always like need it from 3 to 4. I don't really need it in the morning, so it's.
I need it in the morning and want it in the afternoon.
Mm.
But I typically talk myself out of it because it never goes well.
Yeah.
I do the never sleep thing if I drink coffee after like noon.
Team B, you now have up to 3 minutes to comment on Team A's presentation. Any member of your team may speak one at a time. Team B, I will indicate in the chat when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, judges and opposing team, for being here today and for your insightful comments of the case. We believe we agree with you to a point, and I'm gonna give it to Chandel to elaborate.
Yeah, as Erica was saying, we agree with you to a point. I think that we agree in the sense that it is important to remember people's lives holistically. However, it's important to, I think, also remember what they contributed, because obviously, and Violet can elaborate on this in a second, we as people always have some good and some bad. But I think when it comes to these people that we're honoring by naming buildings after, it's important to remember their contributions holistically, kind of like you mentioned with the Woodrow Wilson example. If he's mostly known for all these good things he's done, but is also known for like loving this very racist film, like his contributions over, I guess, who he is as a person, his contributions to history and to society should be remembered holistically. So I think one of the things we want to ask you is why name buildings after people if there are other ways to honor them and remember them, especially if those names like can possibly harm like the mental health of people who are like going into those buildings. And Violet can elaborate some.
Yeah, so if there are other ways to honor people and to continue to get people to donate without having to put their name on a building, just in case they might be bad in the future, what could some of those things be? Like, what are alternatives to just naming buildings after people, and how can we still preserve history without naming buildings, well, keeping the names on some of the buildings? And also, when do intentions and circumstances stop being an excuse for like being raised Confederate, or like, I don't know, being a Nazi, I guess, because you were raised a Nazi? When does that stop being an excuse? Because people have always cared. Even when like slavery was normal, people were still like, hey, this is another person, and that is messed up. So like, yeah, I'm gonna pass it off to Christina.
Yeah, thank you, Violet. And we would also like to ask, if you find a person who's is kind of equally good and bad, when would you draw the line between, when would you draw the line deciding whether they should be considered more bad or more good? And we see the rest of our time. Thank you.
Thank you. Judges, please write down your scores for Team B's commentary. Team A, you now have 3 minutes to confer. Both teams may take notes and communicate in their breakout rooms while conferring. Producer, you may open the breakout rooms now.
about 30 seconds back, Kayla.
Team A has 3 minutes to respond to Team B's commentary. Any of your team may speak one at a time. Team A, I will indicate in the chat when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. And again, I'd just like to thank Team B for a very solid analysis and furthering of this topic. So first of all, we'd like to kind of remind people that you can always add context. So while you might have someone's name on a building, if you go inside that building, you can always include more information about that person. So continuing with our Woodrow Wilson example, you can have information about how he did some good things, how he formed the United Nations and had his 14 points. And you can also add information on how he had some unsavory beliefs, how he was a racist in a lot of contexts. So you can always have that information. So I would like to directly respond to the idea of why we should name buildings after people. And honestly, the easiest answer here is just to ensure that we have a pure ideology. So again, using that Woodrow Wilson example, he has these 14 points. And if a school, such as Princeton, is modeling their curriculum off the 14 points and off of Woodrow Wilson's general ideology, it makes sense to put that at the forefront of your curriculum, even if someone is unsavory. And you can add that unsavoriness into the curriculum, not in that way. You can add that unsavoriness into the curriculum, saying that no one is perfect and we should be able to model ourselves off of someone who isn't perfect, continuing that improvement. And additionally, I love your question of having some alternatives, and those can include putting information on people in museums, and also, again, putting that information in the building so that any students who are going to the school and seeing this name know the full context of the curriculum that they're pursuing. And I'd like to pass it over to Derek.
Thank you, Erica. So I want to address the question about when intentions stop becoming an excuse for circumstances. This is in line with, I guess, the fact that some people did not have bad intentions, but in the end did commit some serious crimes, for example, with the Nazis. And of course, these people are victims of their times. Their ideologies were different, their ethics were different because of where they grew up. Ultimately, though, we as a society should prioritize the now. Inevitably, we are going to condemn people in the past for what we perceive to be unethical actions. So, given that they have these unethical actions, applying a case-by-case basis to look at those who did commit what we consider to be horrible actions for society versus those who didn't or had a net positive on society, we should contend those who we find to have a net negative on the bearings of society and just move on and go on as a unified society and become ever more prosperous. And I think Max has a little bit more to add.
Yeah, thank you so much, Derek and Erica. So finally, I just want to answer a question that I think was posed by Violet. She asked, if a person is equally good and bad, does that person get a building named after them? And I think that the answer that Erica and Derek and I have is that the answer is no, because a building is a large honor, you could say. So if you are equally good and equally bad, that goodness and badness, in my opinion, cancels itself out, so that you don't necessarily deserve a building. You've not done something very good to overwhelm the bad things that you did in your life. So I just...
Sorry, thank you, Team A. That's all we have time for.
Thank you.
Judges, would you please note your score for Team A's response? We will now have a 10-minute question and answer session for the judges in Team A. Judges, you may ask your questions in the order you see fit. I will let you know when there are 2 minutes remaining in the Q&A.
All right, thanks, Erica, Derek, and Max. I would have a question about the 3 criteria that you outlined in your initial presentation, which was consideration of history, public opinion, as well as a holistic view on the person's contributions. And what Max was just saying about like the good and the bad canceling themselves out made me wonder, how do those three criteria interact in having to make a decision? So it seems like we're talking about contributions mainly so far, but I'd love to know how contributions interact with public opinion, but also history.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead,
I
Max.
think that that's a very interesting question. So if we go back to our example about Woodrow Wilson, at the time in the US, when he was alive, when he was born, racism was very prevalent. It still is today, but it was perhaps more prevalent then than it is today. So if we're considering this person in a holistic standpoint, we want to consider the bad things that they did, the bad things that they believed, and then the good things that they did and the good things that they believed. So in the case of Woodrow Wilson, I would say that bad things are liking The Birth of a Nation, a very racist film that had a lot of lies about African Americans and stoked a lot of racial hatred in this country. But then on the other hand, he did a lot of good things in his life as well, like leading this country through World War I and also founding the League of Nations, which morphed into the United Nations, which is an organization that helps support human rights around the world. So in the case of Woodrow Wilson, I think Erica, Derek, and I would argue that the good things he did outweighed the fact that he liked The Birth of a Nation. So that would be a reason why you would have a building named after him. He was probably more good than bad. Now, addressing public opinion, I think that we also should be considering how people feel in this country about an individual. So, for example, Woodrow Wilson is generally not perceived in a negative way. People generally don't know that he liked The Birth of a Nation, and people generally see him as a wartime leader who helped found a prominent human rights organization. So in this case, if we are framing buildings on the question of who they should be named after because of their contributions, I think we should also be considering how they're seen today, because how they're seen today can be different from reality. So I think that Woodrow Wilson, he does deserve a building named after him in both a holistic standpoint and in terms of public opinion. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
I guess I can follow up from that question. All right, so we've got these three criteria. I understand that you're advocating for this like holistic approach to looking at the these figures, but everyone's going to do that math a little bit differently, right? Like you say, the three of you have decided this one way about Woodrow Wilson, but three other people may like just, well, we're going to weigh this a little bit more heavily than we're going to weigh that, right? So I guess my kind of question is like, if this is this the only answer? Like, who decides, right? Like, how many people kind of have to be on one side or the other side? Like, who's doing this math to kind of make these decisions? I mean, maybe this requires zooming out a little bit about this in general, but I don't know. It's not, so maybe that's not a clear question, but.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I think it is definitely very important to look at the stakeholders. In this case, I think that would be the institution kind of as a whole, and then the students who are populating that institution. So I think kind of an adjacent example is a lot of institutions are kind of coming to terms with that they're on native land, and kind of coordinating a response that helps them kind of come to terms with that as both a student body and as an institution that is still kind of making money off of that land. So this is likely going to be on a case-by-case basis, but the most important thing is that institutions and students can come to an agreement or at least a compromise, because as Team B mentioned, the impact of having a racist figure or someone who has been very, very damaging on a building can have a profound effect on someone's psyche if they're attending that institution and modeling themselves off of that ideology. So as long as students are able to kind of share their voice, share their perspectives with the institution and make a decision together, it'll be on a case-by-case basis, but they should be able to reach an agreement everyone's happy with.
So I was wondering how you guys think of the reasons to name buildings or schools or after someone in the first place, because my thought is what the reasons are to do it should have an impact on how you think about when you should undo it and why. And so I was just wondering, what comes to mind is MIT has buildings that are numbered. So you go to building 28. They've recently started naming buildings according to who gave the money to build them or to refurbish them, or that's one kind of reason. Another kind of reason is to honor someone. You know, Princeton built the Woodrow Wilson School to honor their most illustrious president. So I was just wondering how you guys think about why, which reasons why matter to the naming of buildings that should reflect on how you treat the denaming of them.
Okay, I think that is an excellent question. So definitely you have buildings that are named just because people donate. It is a practical incentive to, I guess, get buildings refurbished or constructed. At the same time, buildings are named to honor people, for example, Woodrow Wilson, and to, I guess, promulgate their philosophy, for example, Woodrow Wilson and his 14 points. As regards to denaming, however, I do think that this will have to be more considered after some time has passed between the naming and the denaming. Because when someone just gets their building named, I feel like there's a lot of pushback against getting it denamed immediately because that person is still alive and we're still considering that person's legacy. Now, given maybe a century, like with Woodrow Wilson, in which we can evaluate exactly what his impacts were across history, for example, birthing the League of the Nations, and then that becoming the United Nations. If we evaluate those criteria over a century to see exactly how much impact this person has on the building and on society, then yeah, we can evaluate them with regards to whether we should dename or leave be.
Yeah, am I hearing you right in saying that once the decision's been named to name a building, that's sticky for a while? That the fact that that decision was made and the person's still alive means you think in general you shouldn't be taking into account considerations of the overall worth of her contributions until a long time away from that. Is that
right? So I think it's less of a normative question and more just like, yeah, it is going to be sticky because the building was just named and it would be extremely controversial to just remove it. Maybe there should be like a reason to immediately dename a building as soon as it is named. But just the fact that it was named in that instance and there's still much time to evaluate the decision, that has to be, that goes into the risk calculus here.
But not as a normative element itself.
No, not as a normative element.
I have a follow-up question about like what types of things we should be considering and how we should calculate. So it seems like we have different things that we're considering. We have like the facts, like the historical facts. We have the actions of the individuals, the beliefs that those individuals had, and then also the beliefs of the current population, as well as the feelings of the current population about that original individual. So is there a hierarchy for you on like how we weigh or how we should consider beliefs, actions, facts, and feelings in this case?
Yeah, awesome question. So I personally would say that we should put kind of the current feelings of people higher, simply because we can maintain history in a separate manner. So if we can put the history relating to someone in a museum, great, that should stay there. And then we as a society can make a decision as to whether that person's actions were valid or whether we should condone or honor those actions with a building. So public opinion and again, kind of general feelings of comfort and feelings of tolerance should be prioritized, as those are the values that we as a society have chosen to take. As long, facts, everything should have a weight, but that should be highest.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That's all we have time for. Judges, could you please score Team A's response to your questions? Okay, so we are ready to begin the second half. The case number is case number 12, Harper's Bazaar, and the question is the following. Is it ever morally justifiable to cancel someone for expressing a viewpoint? It is now available in the chat box, or soon will be, for your reference. Team B, you have 3 minutes to confer before beginning your presentation. Both teams may take notes and communicate in their breakout rooms while conferring. Producer, you may open the breakout rooms now.
Sorry, my copy and pasting is slow.
Oh, no, you're fine.
I'm copying and pasting between devices. So I'm doing that thing where there's like a lag, right?
No worries. You're fine. Am I like waiting long enough for, Michael told me to do like 20 seconds or 15 to 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's more than sufficient.
Okay.
Because the judges also have breakout time, so
yeah, the conferral period comes right after. So okay.
Right. If we had this to do again, I think leaving an hour between each match would be the way to go.
Do you think? Oh well, I guess this will definitely be virtual in February because it's the bridge. Or actually no, because that'll be two regional groups against each other. So are you thinking it will probably be virtual though?
It'll be virtual for the rest of the year.
Okay, gotcha.
So the North Carolina regional in January, the playoffs in February, and probably the nationals in April will all be done virtually. Though by then, we won't have to like do it ourselves. So that'll be the exciting part.
Gotcha.
Here they come.
Team B now has 5 minutes to make its presentation. Any member of the team may speak one at a time. Team B, I will give you reminders in the chat when there are 3 minutes and 1 minute remaining.
Yeah, thank you. We would like to thank the judges and opposing teams for being here, and the moderators. We really appreciate you coming on your weekends to be at this tournament. We'd like to start off by saying that there are a ton of different viewpoints on freedom of speech and when it should be limited and when it should be, and when it should be, when you should be able to have freedom of speech. And we think that, like how John Stuart Hill said, freedom of speech should only be limited if it harms someone. And with that, I'll bring it to Erica to elaborate more on that subject.
We believe that that celebrities should be held accountable for what they say more than regular people because of how many people listen to what they say and watch what they do and all their followings. And I'm gonna give it to Violet to elaborate on more.
I'd like to thank the other team and the judges for being here. Right. So because celebrities have a bigger platform and reach more people depend on them to learn things from them, like your audience as well. It's important for us to make sure that if they're spreading hateful views or just not morally justifiable things, that we don't support them in doing that. And there's also there's laws about not saying screaming bomb on a plane or threatening to murder somebody, which ties into Erica's free speech thing, where if you are agreeing with people or supporting people who would like to harm a certain group of people, you should also be held accountable for harming that group of people because you're helping support it to happen. And I'll pass that off to Chandel.
Before I kind of wrap things up and highlight, I'm actually going to pass it back to Amanda to kind of talk about not only what celebrities might say, but the things that they might do and post on the internet.
There's plenty of things that people do and say, but there's the do that's really big thing, like a YouTuber posting a video of her kicking her dog. You're going to get a lot of hate from that, and you're probably going to have a lot less following due to your actions. There's the Amber, I can't say her last name, Heard or Heard? Anyway, she has this whole case going on about domestic abuse. Well, a lot of people don't want to see her in Aquaman anymore because of the case that's currently going on. And a lot of consequences with the freedom of speech. You have the freedom to say whatever you want. You don't have legal actions to certain things, but you do get the consequences from community and society. And with that, I will pass it back to Chandel.
Thank you, Amanda. So kind of just to wrap up, our stance is that it is morally justified to kind of cancel or hold accountable these celebrities because cancel culture really only applies to celebrities in our current society. It is morally justified if what they're saying or doing is actively harming people. Like Erica said, it's important to hold them accountable for the things that they say because it might harm people. A common issue, and I think mentioned in the actual Harper's Bazaar case, is J.K. Rowling recently came forward with a whole bunch of transphobic viewpoints, and she received a lot of backlash for that because she was causing a lot of harm to the trans community. As Violet pointed out, there are we've seen in the past, there are limits to those freedom of speech when they pose possible clear and present danger and possible harm to those people. And like Amanda said, it's not only important to hold people's speech accountable, it's important to hold their actions and what they've done and what they're posting on their internet accountable, because celebrities tend to have these mass followings. So not only do they have a bunch of fans and people who look at their stuff who are very impressionable and who are influenced by what they do, what they say can also reach people who might not have normally seen these things. Like if you're in a community where they don't have these problematic viewpoints, you might not be exposed to them, but then the internet, you have celebrities who bring these things forward, and then you are. And that is kind of all of the points that we wanted to highlight. Once again, thank you for everybody being here, the judges, the moderators, the other team, for your time and your energy today. And with that, we give up the rest of our time.
Thank you. Judges, please mark your scores for Team B's presentation. Team A, you now have 3 minutes to confer. Both teams may take notes and communicate in their breakout rooms while conferring. Producer, you may open up the breakout rooms now.
Here they come.
Team A, you now have 3 minutes to comment on Team B's presentation. Any member of your team may speak one at a time. Team A, I will indicate in the chat when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. So first of all, we'd just like to congratulate Team B on giving a very solid analysis of this case and also providing some really great examples. So I just have a couple of questions just to kind of expand this case and get some more discussion going. So firstly, what actually is canceling? Because it can take up many different territories. For instance, you mentioned celebrities, and that might include deplatforming someone, so maybe removing their Twitter account. It can also just be the repeated almost bullying of people, like again, via Twitter. And it can also simply be criticism. So which definition of cancellation are you taking, and how do these various definitions maybe change the moral equation? Similarly, I just like to double check that I understand your argument. So I believe that we're saying it's debatable whether or not something's morally justifiable, canceling is morally justifiable, but you should be allowed to do the canceling under general freedom of speech and that value. So I believe Max has something to say on your point of how celebrities have a greater responsibility than normal people.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erica. I just want to bring up an example of a controversy centered around somebody who I personally have a lot of respect for. And Monday is his 92nd birthday. It's a good time to bring him up. Noam Chomsky. So in the 80s, there was a controversy. There was a French professor of English, I think, or literature at the University of Lyon. And he wrote a book. He had a very small following. And he wrote a book that said that the Holocaust, it didn't exist. The Nazis were anti-Semitic, but gas chambers did not exist, which I doubt anybody here agrees with. It is just simply wrong and anti-Semitic. And at the time, still now, France had laws banning Holocaust denial. So the professor was removed from his post, and he was fined, and he was sent to jail for several months. So Chomsky came out in defense of Faurisson, because he believed that everybody has the right to express their own viewpoints. Because sort of the issue that we run into is who is it that gets to decide what is morally right in terms of what gets to be canceled? Is it the French government? Is it the French people? And then at the same time, canceling Faurisson by putting him in prison helped him to garner a larger following than if this book would have just been ignored. And it's also worth considering how the French government, how defending somebody's right to say something is different from supporting it. Because it's very easy to just say that Faurisson is wrong and he is evil, but you should be able to offer some more context about why he was wrong. So with that, I'd like to pass it to Derek, because I think he has some interesting things to add.
Yes, thank you. I just have a few abstract questions, which I felt like were axioms in the other team's case. First of all, why Mill? Why are we using Mill's greatest harm principle in order to justify canceling, not canceling people? And also retribution. So are someone's violent and hateful actions grounds for retaliation? Is someone who has used hate speech, is it justified to respond to that person with hate speech, which is a form of canceling a lot of people take? Thank you.
And that's all we have time for. Judges, if you could please write down your scores for Team A's commentary. Team B, you now have 3 minutes to confer. Both teams may take notes and communicate in their breakout rooms while conferring. Producer, you may open up the breakout rooms now.
I just got your chat. Yes. Don't admit them yet. They're coming for finals early because they were not in the previous round, so they didn't get the announcement about us sort of pushing back things a few minutes.
Okay.
So I've just messaged them now, yeah.
Gotcha. I just want to make sure I wasn't the only one seeing it because I know you made me a code.
Yeah. Yeah, I got it. Hopefully they don't mind waiting.
Team B has 3 minutes to respond to Team A's commentary. Any member of your team may speak one at a time. Team B, I will indicate in the chat when you have 1 minute remaining.
We would like to thank the opposing team for giving us these questions to think about. They're really good questions. And I'm going to give it to Shandell to answer some.
Yeah, once again, just thank you. We'd like to start out with, I guess, clarifying or redefining our stance because you asked briefly what our argument was. It's less so that we should be allowed to, and more, it is morally justified to cancel or hold these celebrities generally accountable if it's harming people. Like if what they're saying or doing is harming a group of people. Moving on to your question of what is canceling and how does the definition change like the meaning in our stance. And I do definitely agree with the fact that there are many different viewpoints and definitions of canceling. I think when we're talking about canceling, we mean holding somebody accountable for what they've said or what they've done in a way that addresses that what they said was wrong and or hurtful, and trying to formally like educate them as to why what they said is wrong and hurtful, rather than just simply criticizing them. Because I think there is most certainly a difference between just blanket criticism and like canceling or holding someone accountable. To kind of step into like who gets to decide that is, I'll pass it to Violet.
So when considering who gets to decide what constitutes like canceling being morally acceptable, it's the individuals. It's up to the individual to choose like what they want to interact with and what they don't. And if you don't want, and if like there's a celebrity whose views you disagree with, you can decide that you don't want to interact with them, or that like because they've said something that you don't like, or that harms you, I guess. I'm gonna pass it over to Amanda.
Amanda?
Have we lost her?
I'm back. I fixed it.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to pass it back to Shada.
Okay, to kind of combat the question, is hate speech, like, should it be combated with hate speech? Our answer is absolutely not. As I stated with our definition, or how we're choosing to define canceling and holding others accountable, it shouldn't be done in a way, because it's simply ineffective, to simply come at somebody who's spewing hate speech by spewing hate speech. It should be done in a way that, like I said, properly at least attempts to educate why what they said was wrong and hurtful, in a way that is done as respectful as possible, because we certainly don't think that the proper way to combat hate speech is, as said before, with more hate speech. Once again, thank you everybody for your questions. That's all.
Thank you, Team B. Judges, please note your score for Team B's response. We will now have a 10-minute question and answer session for the judges and Team B. Judges, you may ask your questions in the order you see fit. I will let you know when there are 2 minutes remaining in the Q&A.
All right, I guess I can start us off here. Okay, so that was great. I have just sort of, there's a lot to get into, I think, in this case, but start with just a kind of like foundational question. You talked a lot about harm in your presentation and throughout. How exactly does speech harm?
It can mentally harm people, like if like discrimination through words can affect people's mental health, which is bad. And you can also support groups of people that would readily physically harm people, which constitutes as harm as well, which is bad.
Yeah, kind of talking on to what Violet said. First of all, thank you. I think this is a very important question to kind of to address before getting into anything further. I think it's inherently harmful, especially we mentioned J.K. Rowling in our presentation, and how she displays extremely transphobic viewpoints while discriminating against that group of people, saying like, you don't believe that they are valid, you don't believe that they are, like, I guess, good in a sense, like you disagree with that group of people surely existing. It's extremely problematic and it's extremely harmful to that group of people, especially when these celebrities are like maybe spewing hate speech about minority people who have faced harms and who face challenges because they're actively trying to overcome that, say like racism against the Black community. They're actively still trying to, I guess, prove that they are just as valid as any other race. Same with the trans community. You're actively trying to prove that their existence is valid. Their existence is just as valid as any cis person. And that goes for sexuality, race, anything of like a minority. Just by spewing hate speech, you're essentially criticizing them for simply existing, which can be incredibly mentally harmful. And as Violet said, that can transform into maybe taking more severe, possibly physical action.
Just a quick follow-up, and this might be a little bit of a weird question, but does the speech require other people to be harmful, or is the speech harmful in and of itself? Like J.K. Rowling says that. Does somebody who's trans have to hear it for that speech to be harmful, or do her followers have to hear it for it to be harmful, or is it just simply like if she just said it into a vacuum, would it still be harmful speech, or does it require these other people?
I think there are two different ways to approach that. I think in and of itself, what we consider to be morally wrong and to be harmful means that regardless of your audience, it's still harmful. I know that on Twitter and other platforms, I've seen people saying that like, if you say the N-word by yourself, it's okay because nobody's there to hear you. But then a the majority disagree with that. And they're like, no, that in and of itself is harmful. However, at the same time, in your example of like her to say it into a vacuum, in a way it can be considered not harmful because she believes it's not harmful. So she's essentially just saying it to herself. She doesn't consider it harmful because that is what she believes. so therefore she's only saying it to herself and she's the only one to hear it, it's not harmful because in her mind it's not. However, we as a society have kind of decided that these things are harmful and shouldn't be said, regardless of if you believe they are or not. And kind of touching on what Amanda said earlier, we're by no means saying you're not allowed to say them. We're saying morally, we don't think, and as a society, we don't think they should be said. So if you say them, which you are free to do because of freedom of speech, if they are said, you in a way are still responsible for those ramifications and the consequences of people being upset. I hope that answered your question.
Great, thanks.
So when I was looking at the case, I was struck by how they were characterizing canceling and cancel culture. And it doesn't seem to me to be just the articulate expression of the reasons you think the other people are wrong and trying to educate them. In the case, it was stifling of dissenting voices, suppressing of unpopular ideas, and social ostracism for transgression of speech and thought. And so I was wondering, when you focus on that version of it, do you think that's only justified when there's harm? Do you think it's not even justified when there's harm unless the harm is significant? Do you think, how do you think of those kind of cases where the stifling of voices, so you don't let people speak, or you don't let them come to campus, that kind of thing?
I think we think that that's too far because, well, it would make sense in some very extreme cases, but normally it's important to hear everybody's voice and to hear everybody's opinion because that's how we make changes, and that's kind of what free speech is all about: is hearing the other side of whatever side you may be on, and understanding other people's opinions so that we can make positive changes to society and all that jazz.
Yeah, kind of tacking on to what Violet said. We in no way deny that there is an extremely toxic side to cancel culture, which is why it's kind of adopted its own culture, is that a lot of the time canceling in and of itself turns into this toxic, completely deplatforming somebody and ostracizing them from a community just because they spoke their opinion. And we think that if it's causing massive harm, that accountability should be held, and kind of in a consequentialist viewpoint, if their following or if their reputation is tarnished because of what they chose to say, consequentially, they still harmed potentially thousands, potentially millions of people. So if their reputation is tarnished because they chose to say that, then that kind of falls on them. However, in extreme cases where somebody's just sharing their opinion, I know that I frequent Twitter and I've seen somebody lose millions of followers from something that was misunderstood or because another celebrity chose to slander that person unjustifiably.
All right, I think my question follows from this. So we spent a lot of time talking about people with large platforms and celebrities in particular, but do you think that your argument and your criteria should apply to the average person?
Yes, I think it's applicable to everyone. It doesn't, even if you're just like an average person, you shouldn't be saying anything that would harm others or hurt others, either mentally or physically even. It's for everyone, not just selected people.
And to
Kind of, oh, go ahead, Violet.
And to add on to what Christina said, oh no, it left me. Okay, Shindell, sorry.
No worries. Kind of piggybacking off of that, I think the only difference or determining factor is the fact that when it comes to day-to-day people, we don't call it canceling. We don't look at it as, oh, I canceled Sarah last week because she said something. We don't look at it as that because they don't have that massive following and that potential to harm millions. We just look at it as holding the people that we know accountable. being like, hey, what you said wasn't okay, and here's why, or what you said might affect me or this other group of people that we know, and it might harm them. So I think the only difference is inherently the size or the scale that we're operating on, which is why it takes on a different like wording, which is why I guess we generally don't think of it as canceling. We just think of it as holding each other accountable, which is what we should be doing for people with these big followings.
All right, we're right at the 10-minute mark, so I think that's probably all the questions we have time for. Thank you. Judges, please score Team B's responses to your questions and submit your scoring forms, please. And you guys have all been through this process at this point, but we'll tabulate the scores and then I will announce the winner of this round.
Great job, everybody.
A lot of fun.
Those, I think, were two difficult cases. So.
All right, Kayla, you should have it now.
All right. So again, thank you to both teams for an excellent match and a great discussion. Davidson received the highest number, or Davidson 2 receives the highest number of judges' votes and is the winner of this match.
Thanks to everyone. This is everybody's first time, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Extremely impressive and a lot of nice teamwork. A lot of nice helping each other and building on each other's point and weaving things together in a good way.
Yep, congratulations, everybody. All right, so what we will do now, we'll start reconfiguring for our final match. So Davidson, stay put. You can turn off your videos and stretch out to prepare. Coopville, you guys can hang back. If you'd like to watch the final round, feel free to click over to our live stream. I'm going to drop the link to that in the chat. You'll be able to watch the final round there, and we hope to see you all back at the HQ room at, we're going to say 6:15 rather than 6, since we've gotten a bit of a late start here for the awards ceremony. So we hope to see you there, and we'll announce the winners of the event at that point. Congratulations to both teams for making it this far, and for a wonderful job well done. Congrats, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Wait, so we're just staying here, is that right?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, you can
Okay.
you can step away if you want to. If you want to just turn off your video and audio, you can step away and stretch it out, grab some coffee. Hello, judges, just joining us. Thank you for waiting. We're a bit behind schedule. But we're reshuffling for finals now, so the scores are reporting in the other room. And once the other team shuffles over, we will get it ready.
All right, well, I'll just turn off my video until we're ready to go.
Okay.
Thanks, Alex.
That's great. Be right back with you guys. Hey everyone, if you can hear me, we're going to try and get started at around 5:20. Things went a little long in the other room, so we're going to give the students a few minutes to kind of shake it off and stretch, but we'll get started just shortly.
Okay.
Sorry to keep you waiting. Thanks all.
for folks who've just joined, just a heads up, we'll be starting at 5:20. So take a moment, settle in, grab that final cup of coffee perhaps. We'll be starting at 5:20. We'll be starting in just under 2 minutes. Just a reminder, we'll be starting at 5:20. When you can, please rename yourself according to the convention.
Hello, everyone. I think Alex may have stepped away, or is he here? Alex, are you here?
I am here.
Are we ready to get started?
We are. It's a go.
All right. Thank you so much. My name is Happy Sayer McCord, and I'm the moderator. Welcome to the final round of the inaugural NHSEBBridge Ethics Bowl. Thank you for the teams who've been competing wonderfully all day, and congratulations to the two finalist teams, Davidson Academy Team 2 and A&M Consolidated. Welcome, and we thank the judges for volunteering their time today. And before I go on to judge introductions, at least on my screen, I'm seeing, Alex, your screen, and I wonder if we stop sharing that, whether we can all go to gallery view and then we can see more of each other. Is that possible? Or is that advisable, I should say? Yeah, okay, great, thank you. And then I can make sure we have all our judges. All right, there we go, that looks great. So judges, again, thank you for volunteering your time for the finals. Can we go ahead and have you introduce yourselves? Nick, I'm gonna ask you to start.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Tanchuk. I'm an assistant professor at Iowa State University, and I work in the philosophy of education. So I'm excited to be here. I've been involved in ethics pools here and also in Canada.
Thank you very much. Audra, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Audra Jensen. I am a graduate student in philosophy at UNC and the graduate research assistant for the Parr Center.
And Sarah, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Stroud. I'm the director of the Parr Center for Ethics, home of Ethics Bowl, and I'm also a philosophy professor at UNC.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Students, again, welcome to the final round. If you would please introduce yourselves. Let's start with A&M this time.
I'm Robert. I'm a junior at A&M Consolidated, and I'm ready for the finals.
Hi, I'm Freddie. I'm also a junior at A&M Consolidated, and I'm excited to be here.
I'm Andrew. I'm also a junior from A&M Consolidated. I'm excited for this final discussion.
Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm a junior, and I'm excited to get to talk to y'all.
Terrific. All right. Davidson, can you introduce yourselves, please?
My name is Max Greenstein, and I'm a student at the Davidson Academy in Northern Nevada.
Hi, I'm Erica. I'm a senior at the Davidson Academy.
Hi, I'm Derek. I'm also a senior at the Davidson Academy.
Okay, I think we got everybody. We will now begin the match. Teams, from this point on, there are no substitutions, consulting with anyone other than your teammates, or reviewing outside materials. Coaches and spectators, please remember that communicating with either team, either verbally or via chat, is impermissible. Please keep your microphones muted throughout the competition so that the students can concentrate. And I will now flip a coin to determine the presenting order. And I think I had A&M call it last time, so I'll have Davidson call it this time. Do you know who is going to call your coin flip?
We'll call it tails.
All right, they call tails, and it is tails. So Davidson, would you like to be team A and present first, or team B and present second?
We would like to go second, please.
All right, so team A, judges, is A&M Consolidated. And team B is Davidson, team 2. Please mark your score sheets to that effect. I'll repeat it. Team A is A&M Consolidated. Team B is Davidson, team 2. And we'll move on. So we are ready to begin. And the case for team A is wholesome discipline. The question is, what difference, if any, does an offender's age make to whether we ought to use restorative justice practices? Team A, you now have up to 3 minutes to confer before beginning your presentation. Both teams may take notes and communicate in their breakout rooms while conferring. Producer, you may open the breakout rooms now. Welcome back, everybody. And we have 3 judges and 2 teams. Terrific. Team A, you now have 5 minutes to make your presentation. Any member of the team may speak 1 at a time. Team A, I will give you reminders in the chat when there are 3 minutes and 1 minute remaining, and you may begin now.
So I just want to start by mentioning that I think this is really relevant in today's society due to the punitive culture that we have with detention in schools and then the prison system with adults. But to answer the question of what difference does an offender's age make to whether we ought to use restorative practices, we believe that it does not make a difference in whether we ought to use restorative practices, because we ought to use restorative practices in both cases. However, we recognize that there are differences between young people and adults. And I'll go to Freddie to start explaining these differences.
Thank you. So our first main point is that this restorative justice is clearly the way forward in terms of the criminal justice system. Our team believes that all humans, no matter your age, are products of their environment, and they act based on their surroundings. Social, political, economic, education circumstances, healthcare, all of these things play into how an individual will do once in the real world. For example, those in poverty, those with lower incomes are much more likely to commit crimes, not because of individual problems, but because of societal failures. And when looking at data and research, and when looking at outcomes of different groups of people based on income, based on healthcare, things like that, when we see that, we don't blame individuals no matter their age. We try and get it at the cause of the problem and the root of the issue to really stop these problems and crime becoming by in society, rather than getting at the problem after a crime has already been committed. And I'll go to Andrew to continue our point.
Right. So to sort of expand on what Freddie said, we think that punitive justice for both, I mean, whether you're talking about children being put in detention or adults being put in prison, it doesn't really address the problem as effectively as it could, because it's only really serves as a deterrent at best, and at worst, it can cause you more malicious towards the system, which has probably failed you in some way, to where you feel you need to engage in something that's condemned. So I mean, if you start to feel more malicious towards the system, it doesn't really fix the issue, because you could just wind up doing the same thing again. So we think that restorative justice for both children and for adults is the better option, because they can better internalize what it is they did wrong, and they can better be in a position to restorative justice can better remedy the issues that they might have had that might have led them to commit that crime or behave bad in the first place, rather than punitive justice, which we feel at best is a deterrent, and at worst just fosters more malice and just perpetuates the negativity that person has. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ellie.
Additionally, to add to Andrew's point, adults actually really need restorative justice because they're less likely to seek help for themselves after years of not understanding or not understanding other people's viewpoints. Because when you're participating in a crime or an action that harms or hurts somebody else, like clearly that shows that you're not necessarily considering the people around you or how that action like harms other people. In wholesome discipline, the benefit to wholesome discipline is that it causes citizens who commit crimes to learn from other individuals and why their actions harm others. And so I would like to pass it on to Robert.
Thank you, Ellie. I think an important thing to note is that as children, their brains are more built to learning new neural pathways, and that restorative ways of learning may be more effective on them. However, that doesn't change the fact that restorative justice is still the most effective form of justice. So even though it may be less effective on adults, it is still the best form of justice, and therefore we ought to use it on both adults and children when dealing with problems in our society. And I'd like to go to Evie to summarize.
Thank you, Robert. To summarize our points, just to reiterate, we do believe that we ought to for both, because people will grow regardless. However, we recognize that younger people will benefit more from learning as they are younger, and because their brains are capable of learning new pathways, because punitive practice only serves as a deterrent. And because adults need to be restorative because they're less likely to seek for help themselves after years of not getting any. We cede our time.
Thank you very much. All right. Judges, please mark your scores for Team A's presentation. And when you judges go into the breakout rooms, just a reminder, you may talk about the cases or plan for the Q&A, but you should not discuss your scoring with the other judges. So Team B, you now have 3 minutes to confer, and both teams may take notes and communicate in your breakout rooms. Producer, you may open the breakout rooms now. Welcome back, everyone. Team B, you now have up to 3 minutes to comment on Team A's presentation. Any member of your team may speak one at a time. Team B, I will indicate in the chat when you have 1 minute remaining. You may begin now.
Thank you. And I'd just like to thank the judges, producers, and congratulate the other team on making it to the final round. I'd also like to thank you guys for giving a great systemic or an overview of kind of the systemic issues that are at play here, and also some of the benefits of restorative justice. So we definitely agree with a lot of your points. However, we are we believe that there is a line to be drawn between very young children and the general adult population. So it may not be super clear cut, but I do just have a general question of where do we draw the line? For instance, could a 5-year-old child necessarily participate in restorative justice, and like with the efficacy of that in mind, would it be ethically worth it? So I want to go into a variety of factors here. For instance, the understanding capacity. So it's possible that younger children just simply don't have the capacity to understand how restorative justice works. Because it is so discussion-based, they may not have the verbal skills to be able to share their emotions freely and share how an action actually harmed them. So Just is it possible that it's, or okay, how can we necessarily solve for the idea that, you know, they're not going to be able to understand if we're using restorative justice? And similarly, if we want to prioritize student safety, is restorative justice necessarily the best way to go to ensure that a student doesn't make the same mistake or make the same thing again? And I'd like to pass it off to Derek to talk about the shame element of restorative justice.
Yes, thank you. So the other team brought up that restorative justice is a more effective way of conducting justice, and we wholeheartedly agree. In fact, we might think it's a little bit too effective sometimes. Restorative justice is built on shame. I know our coach used to tell us about her time in Australia, where someone who committed a wrong would be shamed by the community as a way of restorative justice. In the end, restorative justice has that punitive element built in it, regardless of whether it's intended or not. And it can be way too potent for a child sometimes. If it's like a 5-year-old child and we begin to shame this child for acting in the wrong, will this negatively impact their mental health? Can we justify using restorative justice for little children in which we could negatively impact their mental health? And also, just a little bit of a point, the victim has to be willing to contribute because restorative justice is a conversation. So can we infringe on the right of someone who refuses to contribute as the victim to the conversation? And I think Max has a little bit more to say about restorative justice.
Yeah, so I just want to pose 2 more questions to the other team. First of all, I think it was Robert who said that restorative justice is a more effective method of justice. However, I think it said specifically in the case that the study results for restorative justice were mixed. Some studies say that it works better than others, some studies say it doesn't, and some of them are inconclusive. So I was wondering if you could answer what measure are we using to determine the effectiveness of restorative justice? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well done. That is to say, bringing your thoughts to a conclusion. Nicely done. Judges, please write down your scores for Team B's commentary. Team A, you now have 3 minutes to confer. Both teams may take notes and communicate in their breakout rooms while conferring. Producer, you may open the breakout rooms now. All right, we're back. Team A, you now have 3 minutes to respond to Team B's commentary. Any member of your team may speak one at a time. Team A, I will give an indication when there is in the chat when there is 1 minute remaining, and you may begin now.
I would just like to thank the other team for their questions, and also likewise congratulate them on making it to the finals. So to respond to the point about restorative justice and other children's safety at a school, I don't believe this is a concern, because I think restorative justice actually is the safest way of justice, because it fixes the issue rather than just putting a band-aid on it. So it prevents the issue from happening in the future. Additionally, it also creates a level of understanding between students, whereas punitive justice creates a kind of alienation where it's where one can get punished and the other doesn't. It's more division, whereas restorative justice unites them and ultimately leads to more safety. And I'll go to Freddie to answer the next question.
Thank you. To answer your question about victims in this restorative justice practice and whether they should have what we should do with them if they don't want to engage with someone who negatively affected them. Our team takes the position that they shouldn't have an obligation to speak and engage with someone that caused them harm in some type of way. We're taking the consequentialist view, and we believe that we're doing this to help society and to help the victims involved and the criminal involved. And if talking to someone who committed a crime to them causes trauma and causes to more harm, then clearly it's not the solution to go. And I'll go to Andrew to further our discussion.
Yes, thank you, Freddie, and thank you, Davidson, too. Congratulations. You made the assertion that restorative justice is sort of punitive in nature and that it has shame built into it. And is that really something that we should be inflicting on sort of younger children, 5, 6 years old? And we would say that shame is sort of a critical part of this, to where, somebody can kind of, they better grasp what it is that they did wrong, but it's not the full extent of what restorative justice is. It also involves conversations, and there's multiple ways to go about this. I think the aspect we emphasize the most is the conversation aspect, where you feel like somebody's listening to you, somebody's understanding your issues, and while shame might be a part of that, there's other aspects which maybe like mitigate the effect of shame. And for that reason, we think that it's fine to use that on younger children. And with that, I'll pass it.
You also kind of mentioned this point of do 5-year-olds have the emotional capability to understand and participate in restorative justice? Well, if a 5-year-old doesn't have the emotional capability to understand restorative justice, how can we expect them to have the emotional capabilities to understand punitive justice and why they did a wrong thing? And then furthermore, I think that at that level, participating in restorative justice is less about actually like fixing the issue, but more about building those problem-solving skills, about how to solve problems peacefully to make more successful adults in the future where we're not having to use punishment.
Thank you. Judges, please note your score for Team A's response. And we'll give them a minute to do that. And if you can give me a thumbs up when you're ready to move on. Thank you, Nick, Sarah, Audra, wonderful. We will now have a 10-minute question and answer session for the judges in Team A. Judges, you may ask questions in the order you see fit. I will let you know when there's roughly 5 minutes and 2 minutes remaining. Do you know what order you're going to go in? Okay, then you may begin.
Okay, I'd like to thank both teams for excellent engagement with a complicated issue that bears directly on fundamental aspects of school and society. Thank you for that. I want to start with a clarifying question for Team A. As I heard your argument, it relied to some extent on questions of efficacy that Team B sought some clarification on. And it also seemed to ride on questions about responsibility and the root causes for behavior and actions. And so one of the things I wanted to get a little bit more clarity on is to what extent you see individual actions as being a group or collective responsibility, and to what extent you see them as an individual responsibility. And just from there, we can clarify it. But that's what I would like to invite you to just say a little bit more about.
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, I think that's a pretty fundamental question to what we're talking about here. And I think I would start by saying, you asked about to what extent individual actions is the responsibility of a group. And I would start by saying, you know, if a person exists and sort of operates in an environment where they're treated poorly, they're not given a fair shot, they're judged on, you know, not on their merits, but on like other aspects of how they act, maybe their personality, that sort of influences, that sort of starts to influence the way they act, as it fosters some sort of malice. And I think that, you know, people are largely products of their environment. And so for that reason, I think that, for that reason, I think that the way a group behaves has a lot of bearing on how individuals behave. And I think Freddie has more to say about this.
Thank you. I think this is a very relevant discussion, especially in today's society, as we view specific policies for the reason of a lot of problems in America. I think that the way you distinguish between when individual actions are the cause of a problem and when it's societal problems that are the cause of a problem is when you look at outcomes. So when you do research, when you do analysis of education outcomes, housing outcomes, all these different facets of society, and you see that there's a consistent trend with or a disparity with low-income people of different racial groups, then you can see that it's clearly not individuals. If everyone seems there's a certain trend occurring. In that instance, you need to get to the root of the problem. It's not individuals at that point. It's a problem system. It's seeing the disparity and seeing the issue there. So thank you for the question.
Okay, great. I have a, I think, related question. So at one point you said, you gave some great examples of how people are products of their environments, and then you said, we don't blame individuals regardless of their age. And then kind of also in response to some of the things that you just said, you might worry that relying too heavily on the effects of a person's environment, that you're disrespecting people by not respecting their autonomy, right? Like people make free choices. Sometimes those are bad choices, and perhaps respecting them as free people, right? we should blame them, right? We should hold them responsible as individuals. So I'm wondering if you could say some things about respecting people's autonomy and also maybe about what it means to blame an individual. Yeah.
I think that's a really good distinction to bring up. And I think we're not trying to pin the blame entirely on society, but we just want to make sure that the barriers that people face are recognized, and that working solely on an individual will not completely solve the case, and that these systemic barriers need to be addressed and recognized if an individual is to succeed. And I just think it's important to recognize both factors when dealing with justice. So that's why we emphasized it so heavily. But I hope that answered your question.
Sarah, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, so clearly you're all big fans of restorative justice, big unanimous cheerleading squad here. So I feel compelled to poke at that a little bit by asking about something that you might think is a drawback to restorative justice as compared with the administering of some kind of negative sanction on perpetrators, which is, and let me just preface this by saying, you know, I think the phrase restorative justice can refer to sort of a wide range of practices. I'm picking up specifically on an idea that you all mentioned a few times, that it's fundamentally a conversation. So I'm picturing kind of a, you know, big circle time, you know, like everyone sitting in a circle and talking about what happened and talking about what would be an effective way to respond if it happens again or whatever. So here's what I think might be considered a drawback, and I wanted to get your take on that, which is that, so suppose you've got a perpetrator who maybe has like been through this process before, and they've sussed out what it is that they're supposed to say. That is, they've kind of figured out, oh yeah, I have to say that I know I hurt the person and yada, yada, yada. But they don't really mean it. And they're not really repenting. Basically, they're just participating in the conversation because that's what they have to do, but they're not really sincerely taking part in the sort of deeper aims. Now, if a perpetrator can get away with this, it seems like it's possible for them to come through the whole exercise basically without ever having suffered any negative consequences for what they did. And you might think that that's a drawback to a system for responding to wrongdoing. So my two questions to you are, do you agree that that's a drawback compared to if they definitely received some negative sanction? And secondly, do you think that that issue might play out differently depending on the age of the perpetrator? Thank you.
Just under 3 minutes left.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I think that's a really, really interesting question. It's something we probably should consider a little more, but I'll answer that. The example you gave about a conversation, you're definitely right in that it can incentivize sort of insincerity. But I would say that a conversation can encompass more than just sort of just like small talk where a person has, kind of rehearsed answers that they can go to. It can also involve like engaging with like experiencing the effects of what has happened to the victim. And that doesn't necessarily have to be communicating with the victim, but maybe, you're communicating with like a counselor if you're a student, and the counselor communicates to you like what exactly has happened to that victim, how it's had an effect on, like, I don't know, their grades or their relationships. So it's you're better able to internalize the consequences of your action. So what I guess we would say that a conversation isn't necessarily just talking so much as it is really internalizing and experiencing. And for your second question about whether this would change depending on age, I guess for somebody who's older, they would be more willing to just sort of give a rehearsed answer, maybe if they've been through this often. And I guess over time they just kind of become more and more detached from this process, and they become more and more attached to just sort of flushing out just some pre-rehearsed insincere answers. So I guess that's why we argue that it's better to start with restorative justice early, and it's more crucial for young people. And I think Evie wants to expand on that a little more.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to like the first part of your question, I guess. I understand your vision about everyone sitting in a circle and just like having a conversation. But I think another important aspect that we mentioned is the shame part, which isn't necessarily meant to be a bad, like shaming someone for doing something wrong, but it's more to be just like shaming them so they can like realize what they did wrong. And I think that's an important part of the conversation, I guess, in question, because sure, if it was just a conversation talking about how they can fix it, I guess they can go through and be like, oh yes, I understand, like that was wrong, I hear you, but then they get off scot-free. But the point of the shame aspect is to really make them feel what they did and make sure that they actually feel what was wrong. And I think the shame kind of self-corrects the like getting I guess like figuring out what they can say to get through to just get through the conversation part. Thank you for your question. Oh, and I think Robert wants to expand a little bit on this.
Yeah, I just want to add really quick that if someone is able to get through it, they get the right answers and they still commit it, it actually exposes what is wrong with the person. So there's actually a benefit that you see more needs to be addressed. So there are benefits to it as well.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Judges, please score Team A's responses to your questions. And that ends part 1 of the final round of our ethics bowl. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Audra. Thank you, Nick. All right, we are ready to move on to the second half. And the case for this half of the round will be defunding the police. The question is, when, if ever, are the leaders of social movements morally obligated to compromise on their demands? Team B, you now have up to 3 minutes to confer before beginning your presentation. Both teams may take notes and communicate in your breakout rooms while conferring. Producer, you may open the breakout rooms now. Can't wait to find out what surprises you all have in store for the awards element of the evening.
I'm looking forward to it. Without letting on anything.
Don't let on anything. As I say, I'm looking forward to it, but I don't need to know what it is. I asked the kids in the last round what they were going to be doing after this long day for them, but y'all, I hope, have some really relaxing plans for the end of this day too.
I think my plans consist in having no plans, and that'll be the break. Yeah.
Fair enough.
One of the funny things about a day-long event is the way that, given that you're sort of virtual the whole time, that the sunlight shifts. You can sort of see time passing in the way that everybody's sunlight is being, cast into the room.
Yeah, and then disappears.
Exactly. Wait, too soon. Also, it disappears too soon. But.
Too soon in December for sure. Yep, absolutely. Well, at least you don't have another day tomorrow to look forward
to. That's right.
Doing the nationals.
That's right. That's
a big weekend.
Yes. Yep.
Welcome back, everyone. Team B, you now have 5 minutes to make your presentation. Any member of the team may speak one at a time. Team B, I will give you reminders in the chat when there are 3 minutes and 1 minute remaining. You may begin now.
Okay, so I'd just like to thank everyone here for listening to this conversation. This is a very hot topic, especially given the wake of BLM. I want to touch a little bit on the semantics of this question, because there are a few things that are a little bit unclear that bears consideration for clarification. So first, the difference between obligation and right. Obligation is more of a normative attribution in which we say someone ought to or should do something. On the other hand, rights are something in which, can we force other people to do this, or can people exercise this right? So it's a question of can versus should. And then also leaders. What do leaders have as a right or an obligation? We find that from the word leader, a leader has a moral obligation to the people he or she leads, because the leader moves them in some sort of common direction. A social movement, per se, that ultimately requires the leader to act towards them. Besides that, maybe they don't really have an obligation. But because we are talking about social movements specifically, these social movements are here to benefit society. Now, ultimately, our case is going to boil down to whether it will depend on basically what is being asked for. I think Max has a little bit more to add about what specific moral obligations leaders of social movements have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Derek. And again, I'd like to congratulate the A&M team for making it to the finals. So I just want to talk about the idea that some progress is better than no progress, and that there isn't necessarily a limit in time for how long progress can take. So as they say, Rome wasn't built in a night. So in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, they're making large claims. They say that they want the police defunded and some of that money that we currently spend on the police transferred to social services and schools and things that would stop the police from being needed in the first place. And I think that Derek and Erica and I agree with this main principle. But in terms of the question of do they have an obligation to compromise, I also think that the answer is yes, because it's unlikely that overnight the majority of Americans will all of a sudden support this idea. In fact, currently the minority of Americans support this idea. But however, it is likely that maybe a compromise can be reached where some money is diverted to other social services, but not as much as the Black Lives Matter community wants, or say no money is taken away from police, but more money is spent on schools. That could also be a compromise that I think that would support some of the main tenets of the Black Lives Matter movement, while not going as far as, say, they might want. So I think that ultimately, yes, I think that there needs to be some level of compromise, because it's more pragmatic that a goal can be reached through compromise rather than all of a sudden overnight. So I think that I want to pass this over to Erica because she has some interesting things to add.
Thank you, Max. Yeah, so just to kind of recap, if there is a compromise initially, that does not mean that it's the end of the fight. So for instance, if in the example Max mentioned, Black Lives Matter activists say that a smaller amount of money than they want is going to go toward services that aren't the police department, that's fine for now. That's something that they should take to kind of uphold that expectation of increasing social good. But in the future, that doesn't mean they just have to stop advocating for what they were initially advocating for. So in that respect, there is not an obligation to just completely stop in favor of compromise. And furthermore, another kind of example relating to this is that with the recent Black Lives Matter movement, there's been a lot of push to do a lot of renaming. One that came to mind was like Aunt Jemima being renamed, and a bunch of companies were doing this seemingly to kind of placate the Black Lives Matter movement. And while these things are social good, it doesn't mean that the Black Lives Matter movement needs to stop there. So yeah, in conclusion, the Black Lives Matter social movements have an obligation to their followers to go for as much social good as they can possibly get. So if that does necessitate a compromise, then yes, they do have that obligation to take a compromise. Thank you. We cede our time.
Thank you very much. All right, judges, please mark your scores for Team B's presentation. Team A, you now have 3 minutes to confer. Both teams may take notes and communicate in their breakout rooms while conferring. Producer, you may open the breakout rooms now. And we're back. Team A, you now have up to 3 minutes to comment on Team B's presentation. Any member of your team may speak one at a time. Team A, I will indicate in the chat when you have 1 minute remaining. You may begin now.
We just want to start by thanking Davidson from their presentation. It's really informing. So our first question is, you mentioned that leaders are obligated to their movement, and we're just curious about what kind of obligation that is. Is that an obligation to act in the movement's interests or to act for what's best for the movement? For example, a movement may demand a policy, yet the compromise may be better for them. So what should the leader do in that situation? And I'll go to Freddie for our next question.
Thank you, Robert. Many of these leaders of social movements that we're discussing here are activists, and they're on the ground groups that are fighting for legislation at every level of government. They're not PR firms trying to pallet this issue to the American public. So let's say defunding the police is the morally correct position to take. Should activists push this policy position in ways they can to city councils and government bodies in quiet, and then lie about their position to the public in order to not hurt people who might not necessarily want it on a federal level? And I'll go to Andrew for our next question.
Yes, thank you, Freddie, and thank you, Davidson, for those points. My question is, if the compromise is such that it allows for the situation to revert back to the way it was pretty quickly. So like with the example of police, let's say there's a compromise reached where there is funding that's pulled, but large police unions can still lobby politicians a lot to the point where some of the changes just get reverted through legislation later. Is that a situation where they're obligated to compromise because it's better in the short term, but it can still like produce the same outcomes in the long term? And my next question will be for, I'll just go to Evie next.
Thank you. My question for you is, in the case of defunding the police, for example, whether or not we compromise can affect the people who are dying due to the police, and in general with progress and compromises, sometimes playing the long game can result in death and suffering of many. So what do you say about those who will suffer or even die in the meantime if progress is not made immediately or soon immediately? The next question will go to Ellie.
You kind of talk about this idea of that compromise is beneficial, but are there certain situations where maybe not compromising is more beneficial? Like, for example, the American Revolution, like it was very beneficial and America was much more beneficial rather than just trying to compromise with Great Britain.
We see the rest of our time.
All right, thank you. Judges, please write down your score for Team A's commentary. Team B, you now have 3 minutes to confer. Both teams may take notes and communicate in their breakout rooms while conferring. Producer, you may open the breakout rooms now. Thank you. Okay, everybody is back. So Team B, you have 3 minutes to respond to Team A's commentary. A member of your team may speak one at a time. Team B, I will indicate in the chat when you have 1 minute remaining, and you may begin now.
So first, I'd just like to thank A&M for their insightful cross-examination. And yes, I want to first examine what exactly is the moral obligation of a leader of a social movement. So we can examine this in terms of the 3 major action-based normative ethical theories: Kantian ethics, contractualism, and consequentialism. So in Kantian ethics, the role of the leader means that a leader has a perfect duty to further the stated goal of the movement that they are leading. In contractualism, they owe to their followers in the social contract to further their goal. And as consequentialists, they should compromise because this will bring something which is better than nothing. And action is better than nothing happening if it yields some good. So on to the first question that they posited. What kind of obligation does a leader have? Do they act in the movement's interest, or what's best for the movement? Now, I'd like to say that usually these two align. However, if they don't, then they act in the movement's interest because of that Kantian formulation and that contractualist formulation. Because if they try to do something that they believe to be better for the movement, then that is ultimately paternalistic, and it doesn't really help the movement's interest. Following, basically, there's this question about should leaders lie to the public when they're pushing for compromise positions. I'd say no, they should push for these compromises and then not lie to the public, but communicate that information and how they're moving towards a better goal through their social movement. Following, there's this question about short-term effects being beneficial but not long-term effects. And yes, this might not fulfill the consequentialist formulation of a social leader's obligation. However, you still have that Kantian and contractualist framework where they still have that obligation to their followers. And in addition, they're not really yielding a negative effect through not compromising. They should compromise to yield as much benefit as possible. And I think Erica has some more to say about the following questions.
Yeah, so I just mostly like to respond to, I believe it was Evie's point, talking about just the death that is currently occurring and how best to mitigate that. And I definitely agree that's a very serious issue and something that should be front and center in this discussion. However, compromise is ultimately going to be better than revolution. So you mentioned the idea, or you mentioned the example of the Revolutionary War as a situation in which we didn't compromise and in which we got something good. However, there was a lot of carnage in the Revolutionary War, and it was a war. Whereas right now we're in policy discussions. We're not necessarily at the brink of a war or of a civil revolution. So ultimately, a revolution is going to have the most negative effect, at least in the short term, on the people who are kind of lowest in society, those who are currently being disadvantaged. So while perhaps in the long run, that okay, thank you. I yield my time.
Finish your thought. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So while generally that would perhaps in the long term bring about a better situation, in the short term it would yield a supreme amount of damage for the people who are currently being harmed. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Judges, please score Team B's, note your score for Team B's response, and then we'll move into the question and answer session. And it looks like we're ready. Thank you very much. We will now have a 10-minute question and answer session for the judges and Team B. Judges, do you know what order you're going to ask your questions in? Great. Then you may begin, and I'm going to try and just give you a sense of time, either verbally or in the chat. So go ahead.
Okay, great. So you talked a lot about the different obligations that leaders have, but I never got entirely clear on exactly who the obligations are to. So I was wondering if you could say more about, is it obligations to the movement itself, to the people that make up the movement, to the country, to the people that the movement is supposed to help? There's lots of different actors here, and I'm wondering what kind of obligations leaders have to these different kinds of actors.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think leaders, by definition, have this sort of moral obligation to the people that are being led. Sorry, but these people make up this social movement, which in effect is working towards the good of society. So while the direct moral obligation a leader has is to his or her followers, those followers comprise this social movement, which in effect will act towards benefiting society. So yeah, all three really. The leader has a moral obligation to his or her followers, the social movement, and society, but they are most directly obligated towards their followers.
Yeah, can I just ask a quick follow-up? So, I mean, you might think that if the primary obligations are to the movement or to the people who are in the movement, kind of as members of the movement, there might be a worry that like ending the movement is not a thing that a leader should do, right? Compromising ends the movement, right? Or maybe it doesn't kind of totally end the movement, but it kind of reduces the uptake in the community, right? And so, I mean, what do you do about that? Does that make sense?
Oh, sorry. I mean, I like the question. I think it's very interesting. So going back to something that we said in our first speech about how compromise does not necessarily mark the end. So there's a plethora of different examples, but if we're looking at Black Lives Matter, like the case, you know, a possible compromise would be maybe police department spending isn't decreased, but social services, schools, things like that, spending is increased. Another possible compromise is that maybe some money is diverted from police to social services, but not as much as they want. So in this case, we are furthering the goal of the movement in that more money is being spent on social services, while acknowledging that it's not very pragmatic that we go and seek the ultimate goal, considering that the majority of Americans do not support the ultimate goal. So we think that in this case, compromise would not end the movement, because there still is significant room for the movement to operate, considering that not all of their goals were met. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about a possible drawback to at least some compromises, and see how this would affect your argument. Because it seemed like in your generally pro-compromise position, a sort of important plank of that position was that compromising now doesn't preclude moving toward even more beneficial outcomes from the point of view of the movement later, right? So that sort of the door remains open for what you ultimately want, even though now you've compromised. And I guess it seemed to me that sometimes compromising actually closes that door. So like a concrete example would be if you sued someone and then you agreed to settle the suit. You are forever dropping whatever claims you had originally hoped to sustain against the person, right, in return for accepting like this partial settlement. Or another example might be in a union negotiation. It might be that in order to agree on, say, higher wages, the union has to drop whatever they were arguing for like better working conditions or something. So, sometimes compromising doesn't just mean, okay, well, I'm going to take this now, but all my more ambitious demands kind of remain on the table for later. Sometimes compromising means agreeing that you're not going to press for those further demands. And it seemed to me that I'm interested to know how you would respond to that kind of case, because that didn't really fit your template, which was let's take what we can get now and then keep working for even more later. What's the ethics of compromise if taking something now is going to close the door for later rather than leave it just as open as it ever was?
That's a great question. I think that definitely adds quite a bit of complexity. I'm sorry, Max. But effectively, I think here we need to return to kind of where that pure obligation lies, as Derek previously mentioned. So the obligation of these leaders is to their people and to their movement. So in the example of like settling out of court, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit, where like maybe you don't have the resources to keep fighting your case in a way that is going to reflect positively upon your movement. If it looks like you're just kind of being obstreperous and you're just kind of intentionally trying to stymie someone when they're in the right at one point, then yes, I think that leaders have that obligation to their movement to save face in that situation, and yes, maybe take that compromise, even though it's going to end something, just because it's the purest representation and the most positive representation of their larger group.
I mean, and just to add on to that, I think that it also, there's some level of complexity based on what the compromise is. So like we said about Aunt Jemima, if the only compromise was that all of the demands of Black Lives Matter would end as long as Aunt Jemima was renamed, I don't think that that would be worth ending the entire movement. But say $100 million were cut from police departments instead of $150 million. I don't know if that's the goal. It's just a number I've created hypothetically. Then in that case, I think that your goal is basically met. So I think that that would be, in that case, the most pragmatic solution would be to compromise, because you have an opportunity for the main goals of your movement to be met, even if there's some slight differentiation.
We have just under 3 minutes left. Nick.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to pick up off of some of this claim about some of the questions that have been asked about the nature of responsibility and to whom folks are responsible. So one of the things I've heard echoed again and again is that leaders are responsible to the members of their movements. And it occurred to me that some social movements are highly plausibly morally bad. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case in this case, but the general idea that leaders are responsible to advancing the interests of their constituents or to their movements, however you want to parse it, it seemed to me if we treat that as a general maxim, that it raises these complicating questions that arise in cases where the movement itself maybe is morally problematic. So the question I have for you is, does the moral correctness of the movement's goal or the members' goals in some way shape the leader's responsibility to those members? And if so, how, in your view, how does that factor in which perspectives or which considerations or which interests within the movement a leader rightly pursues? And does it sometimes maybe even lead them to totally disregard, their members' de facto interests?
Sure. Thank you. That's a really excellent question. There's a lot of food for thought. So I'm thinking that a leader, by definition of his or her role as a leader, does have this sort of obligation to his followers, regardless of what the movement is. Now, these movements can be morally problematic, and this is where moral interests do conflict. For example, the leader of a supremacist organization, they would, in essence, be furthering this organization's goal, which would harm society. So yeah, we do have this standard in which we have to contrast someone's moral obligations. I think this is a very hazy part of ethics in which we have to understand to what degree something we can consider to be good or bad. We still don't really have a clear definition for the rightness or wrongness of actions. And it will really have to depend on what society evaluates as good or bad during that time. So for example, a leader of a white supremacist organization, yes, they do have a moral obligation to lead their organization, but this does contradict their obligation to society because we deem white supremacism as a morally bad thing. So there are two different obligations. In this case, I would say their obligation to society supersedes their obligation to their social movement. With regards to other social movements, so when they align, of course, leaders should pursue their moral obligations.
All right, thank you very much. Judges, please score Team B's responses to your questions and submit your scoring forms. And while they're doing that, I would like to thank the judges for your time today. And I would also very much like to thank the amazing staff at the National High School Ethics Bowl and the PAR Center and all of the coaches, the parents, the other supporting people that make all of this happen. So thank you to you all. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And I especially, most of all, want to thank these wonderful students for another terrific round today. Well done, very well done to both teams. What an interesting set of conversations. Thank you so much. So bravo to you both. And we will await the judges submitting their votes, and we can have conversation in the meantime. Get up, stretch your legs, whatever you need to do. We've decided we're not talking about the cases.
As the judges score, here is one of the surprises that we had in store for the awards ceremony. So I've remapped all the links, so folks are going to be coming over to this room, and for folks joining us via live stream, we're officially in the awards part now. So we're going to go ahead and start this. We'll have a little bit of a coming attraction while the judges and the scorekeepers are doing their work behind the scenes. First, I want to say just a few things. Thank you, Happy. Like you said, all of the important stuff, which is to thank all of the students primarily. Before we get to the thing that you're all waiting for and announce the winner, I want to follow up too, and just again commend all of the teams on their performance today. As I think Michael mentioned this morning, the fact that you're out here on a Saturday in December when your semester's either winding down or already over, thinking, talking, and working together on tough moral issues really makes us hopeful about sort of where we're headed as a society. When in a year where we could just as easily not be, I think that's really important. We're so thrilled to welcome you to the National High School Ethics Bowl, and we hope this is the beginning of a great relationship with the program and with our very large and very diverse and very important community for years to come. So you've heard a lot today and this season so far, not just about the mechanics of the Ethics Bowl or the cases that you've been talking about all day, but about the activity's central values, those things which are sort of social and academic and democratic. Rather than saying many more words about those things myself, I want to turn things over to a special guest who's joining us to kind of welcome you into our community and to our activity. So I'm really excited to introduce you to Robert Leidenson, who is Professor Emeritus in Philosophy at the Illinois Institute of Technology. And in 1993, he founded the Intercollegiate Ethics Bowl, on which the National High School Ethics Bowl is based. Bob is the sort of creator and progenitor of basically everything that you have seen today. We and this activity owe him much, and I'm very excited to turn things over to him to share some words of wisdom and to welcome you to our community. Bob, please take it away. I think you're muted, Bob, sorry. Wouldn't quite be a special moment if we didn't have a mute problem. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd be remiss, though, before I begin the comments, if I didn't say that people always ask me, you know, how did you ever get the idea of the Ethics Bowl, or how did you accomplish this great activity that has gone on now for 2 decades? And I always say, well, you know, there's an old saw that every professor has his or her one good idea. but that said, I could go on a long time, and I've written articles about the educational objectives of the ethics bowl, but I just want to. I think I can best get at it briefly by relating a question that was posed to a group of high school students many years ago who came to our campus, Illinois Institute of Technology, early in the morning on a Saturday for an enrichment program from their high school. These were kids from the Pullman area on the southeast side of Chicago, which is a very low income area and an area which struggles in a lot of ways otherwise. And a colleague of mine from Illinois Institute of Technology, Kelly Lawson, and I did an ethics bowl workshop with these students. And when it was over afterwards, one of their teachers asked the students this question. He said, suppose the issues in these cases that you had considered had been presented to you and you had never heard of the ethics bowl and you had never gone through the kind of procedures that we had done that day, explaining the rules, the objectives, the purpose of the ethics bowl. What do you think would have happened? And one of the students said, oh, you know what? We probably would have wound up just shouting at each other. And I thought that just said it all. Whether we're talking about the relationship between ethics bowl and democratic deliberation or moral understanding, it's about cooperation, about community, and trying to understand the views of people who differ from those that you hold. And I'm really sorry I didn't have a chance to observe the competitions. The 10 minutes or so I just heard were very, very impressive, and I'm in awe of all the work and effort that went into this excellent presentation. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
I'm glad you picked up on exactly what we've been working on all day. Cooperation and community. It's the most important part of all of what we do. So now on to the awards part that you came for. Thank you very much, Bob. It's cheesy to say, but in some ways, of course, for all of the reasons Bob just listed, you've all won to a degree. The discussions I've seen today, I have seen most of them. They've been terrific, and I also am just deeply impressed with not only your performance today, but your growth over the course of the season, which, thanks to the particular approach we've taken to this program, we've been able to observe in a way that we never have. So that's that makes all of the work absolutely worth it. So that said, given that in some ways you are all winners, all participating students will receive a digital certificate commemorating their completion of the Bridge program, and the winning and runner-up team will receive an additional award, which will be shipped to their schools starting next week. I'm also happy to announce that each participating school in the Bridge program will receive a small, nowhere near what it's worth, but important development stipend of $300 each to start growing and nurturing Ethics Bowl teams and programs at your schools. And now for the moment, of course, that you've all been hanging around for, we have a result. The winner Well, actually, I won't even start the sentence that way. I'll start the sentence by saying that the finals were as complicated as the semifinals, in that the judges' votes were a tie. Now, luckily, we have a lengthy rules packet, which is not exactly a page turner, but it does give us a procedure to follow here. And that procedure is that the decision is resolved by a secondary data point, which is total points earned during the match, right? So those points are decisive, and the winner of the inaugural NHSEBBridge Ethics Bowl by a margin of 1 point . Oh, my audio just went out. Oh my God, what a time. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
My headphones just died.
Been there.
The winner, I'm sorry, I just left you all in terrible suspense. What a great time for my headphones to die. The winner is Davidson Academy by 1 point. Congratulations. Let's give Davidson and all of our students a round of applause, even if virtual. If you want it to be less virtual, feel free to unmute and actually clap for the great work that all of these students have done all day long. We are very appreciative. You know, while I'm in the business of thanking, I want to thank not only Bob, of course, and the students, as Happy mentioned. I'd like to extend a couple more before we leave. Of course, you know, to the students, to the coaches, to the volunteers for both giving up your day and for your patience as we adjust to a new format, which, while in some ways smooth, is less than non-ideal. Also, of course, to my team at the Parr Center for Ethics. They've been working behind the scenes all day, in many cases unseen and unthanked, to make all that you've seen possible. And finally, though by no means least, to Michael Vasquez, the new outreach director at the Parr Center, who's become my kind of trusted right hand. This program would not be possible without your ideas, your work, which can be relentless, and your commitment to bringing philosophy to high school students all around the country. So thank you all. That officially concludes our proceedings for the day. Congratulations, Davidson, and congratulations, everyone.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Terrific job, everyone. Real pleasure.
All right, thanks everyone. You're off the hook. Winners, schools, and the winner will be in touch shortly about shipping your awards and getting the stipends taken care of. We're excited to see what you do with them, and we're excited to see the programs grow at all of your schools. Welcome.
Thanks, everyone. Take good care. Bye-bye.